everybody is in. All right, good afternoon. Good to see everybody. We are here with Jackie Lentini, who is an immigration attorney from the law offices of Jacqueline Lentini. And we are very pleased to welcome her to provide a F-1 student employment workshop. And she's also going to be discussing some trending hot topics at the end with the new administration as well. So this session will be recorded for future viewing if you need to. And we've scheduled this for about an hour. And there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. Sorry, I'm doing double duty here. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is, if you're not speaking, if you could please mute yourself so that there's no background noise while Jackie is speaking, that would be great. We will make this available, if you would like to, her contact information for any follow-up questions that you may have for her, or if you're interested in utilizing her services in the future. So that being said, Jackie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So just not to put anyone on the spot, but where are the students from that we have on the call?
Canada.
Okay. Can the rest of you shout out where you're from?
Pakistan.
And is Tim a student?
Yes, I'm a student.
Where are you from?
Vietnam.
Okay. I'd like to get an idea. It helps when we get further along in the presentation, but I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for over 21 years, all in immigration. And I'm down the street from you guys in St. Charles, so geography is helpful sometimes. I'm excited to work with ECC. I, before law school, was also a student counselor for the F1 and J1 students at Purdue University and the University of Houston. So talking to students is a sweet spot for me. And I'm going to now begin. I'd like to start very simple, and then we'll get more complex, but we deal with so many acronyms in immigration. I don't want to lose you by using the acronyms. So just to go over some of the basics, here is a slide with the main government agencies involved in immigration in the US. We had a seismic event in immigration on 9/11 in 2001 with the terrorist attacks. And at that time, President Bush decided to take immigration, the Immigration Service, you may hear it on TV sometimes, called INS, and that was under the Department of Justice, and he created this new agency and put immigration under Department of Homeland Security. So DHS is sort of the blanket agency that oversees the main agencies involved in immigration. So next here we have U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS. And this agency is the main adjudicative body for family and employment-based cases. And then next we have Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. So Customs deals with the good side of things coming into the US, and the Border Protection piece is, you know, when you enter the US via the airport, the officers there along with TSA are inspecting you. And we'll talk a little bit more about CBP later on. But I am, just to let you know, I'm on the Immigration Bar's Liaison Committee with CBP for the ports of entry here in the Chicagoland area. So mainly O'Hare and Midway. We meet with them in person about twice a year. We did have one meeting postponed because of COVID, but last month we did go in person, and that's a really valuable asset for us. I do get calls from, you know, people sometimes stuck at the airport, and it's good to know that we have a good relationship with our
trial version
officers. The next agency listed here is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE.
Trial version.
And this agency is the agency that oversees the SEVA system, which you're probably familiar with. Then
Trial
we
version.
have, I'm hearing some background. I don't know where that's coming from. Lauren, do you hear that? Trial version? It's saying trial version.
I'm hearing
I
it.
have it as well. I'm going to mute the participants, so
Okay.
that should help.
Okay, thank you. So other areas, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is really the enforcement branch of immigration. And, and aside from SEVIS, hopefully you won't have to come across this agency too much. They do go and you hear about raids in the newspapers. They round up people and send them home on planes. They also will audit employers looking for unauthorized individuals. The Department of State is the next agency listed here, or the DOS, and this agency is where most foreign nationals have their first experience with US immigration when you go to apply for your visa stamp, most likely your F-1 visa stamp. And the DOS is also the agency that oversees the J-1 exchange visitor program. It's a cultural exchange, and it's very different than any other visa category that we really have and work with. It has many, many different options. Sounds like at ECC, you may have the student option and a few other categories. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then the Department of Labor, or DOL, that's the federal DOL. That's an agency that oversees the first step of an H-1B and that visa process. And then it's also heavily involved in the green card process when it's done through employment, called PERM. Next up, I want to talk about concepts a little bit. We have the difference between a non-immigrant and an immigrant. An immigrant is easy. An immigrant is someone who is in the US and it's a permanent thing. They either have a green card, or they've, based on one of the ways that you can obtain a green card, they're here for good if they want to be in their future. A non-immigrant is, on the other hand, someone who's here for a shorter period of stay. So that would be like the F-1 and J-1 students. And you're given a specific purpose for being here on the F-1, which is to study, is for a specific place. And in your case, it would be ECC, and it's for a specific length of time. So students have a unique status in that they're given DS. Does anybody here know what DS means? Students versus staff, please.
No, we don't.
Okay, so DS, when you get that placed either in your passport or on your I-94 record, that stands for duration of status. And it's really something that was, I think, genius to give students, because you never know how long it'll take a student to finish their program. You know, you could change your major or need a semester or two to finish. So instead of giving you a date specific, just like all the other visa categories, you're given DS, because immigration does realize that students may not take, you know, the allotted amount of time on the I-20 that they're given. So those are the main differences between a non-immigrant and an immigrant. And another concept we talk about in immigration is dual intent. There are some visa categories that allow you to be here in your short-term non-immigrant status as a student, or I'm sorry, not a student, but as a worker, and also to be employed and be applying at the same time for a green card. For instance, if you're in H or L status, it's not a problem if you're also pursuing a green card at the same time. However, as a student, it is a bit of an issue because students don't have that dual intent. You're not really permitted to be here to study and pursue a green card. So where it would come up is if you, say, marry a US citizen you would no longer be eligible to travel abroad with your F-1 student visa. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not exactly that you absolutely can't do it, but it does create issues. So before you do it, you definitely would want to talk to Lauren and Natalie, or reach out to an attorney. So the next concept to mention is the visa versus visa status. Everyone who is an F-1 student has, except for the Canadian on the call, has a visa stamp or a visa foil in their passport that they were issued from the US Embassy or consulate abroad. And that is like your movie ticket. It serves to get you into the US. So it has to be valid upon entry to the US. After you enter, it's your visa status that is what you have here in the US. So you hold F-1 student status. You're given that status by the CBP officer at the port of entry. So a lot of times it's at the airport, and you need to make sure that they have indicated correctly what status you have. If you say have a tourist visa in your passport as well as an F-1 visa, if the officer is in a hurry, or if they want to go to lunch, or they're having a bad day, or they're still new and in training, they may not see that you have the F-1 visa and enter you incorrectly as a tourist. So that would create problems for your visa status and require you to reach out to Lauren in her office. So it's best to be chatty with the officer there, just to make sure that you're on the same page. They know you're a student, they're giving you DS. It's much easier to fix a problem in the moment at the airport than it is later on. I'm going to talk about student employment. This is something that I feel should be an overview for you, and from, you have good people there shepherding you through this process, but sometimes it's also good to hear something from a different perspective or a different way. And so maybe it sinks in better after you've heard it, a couple of different times. So we'll go over the F-1 student employment options, and then we'll talk a little bit about the work visa options and touch on green cards and the transition administrations. So that's where we're really going over the next hour. Do we have many students who are towards the end of their stay on their call here? Graduating soon?
I'm about the middle.
Middle, okay. Anyone else want to unmute themselves?
Yeah, me too, but I'm going to transfer another university.
Next semester?
Yes.
Okay. So that's good to point out, that you would need to make sure you're talking to Lauren and Natalie so that that process is done properly. So as we mentioned earlier, you need to have this paper trail, and since the student visa is specific to ECC, they need to file the paperwork, make sure you're complying so that USCIS is aware of your transfer. But getting back to the slide, as you know, F-1 students are eligible for on-campus employment, and it can be up to 20 hours or part-time during the school year, and it can be full-time during any breaks, so like a long holiday break or the summertime. And when you start talking about off-campus employment, that's when it gets a little bit more involved. You do need permission. You either need it from your International Educational Program Office, or you need it from USCIS. So we'll talk about both of those, the curricular practical training and optional practical training, a little bit more in a minute, but I'll also just mention economic hardship. This is given to students very rarely. It is done by USCIS, but it's really done only when there's a situation that arises after you get to the US that would change your circumstances and severely impact your economic situation for studying in the US. So I've had students get it like when war breaks out in their country, or 10 years ago, we had a really bad earthquake in Japan, and we had Japanese students able to apply for it then. So those are the types of situations where you would run into. It's not something you could rely on. We'll spend a minute here talking about curricular practical training, or CPT. Has anyone on this call done that so far in their studies here?
No.
No, I can answer that for you.
Okay, so the schools have a little bit of leeway in how this program is implemented. So Lauren, if I say something that isn't how you do it, please let me know. But normally it's done when a student is looking for some type of internship that would fit in with what they're studying in their field of study. And you can do it part-time during the school year, or you could do it full-time, say on breaks or in the summer. But you have to be careful, because if you do 12 months of CPT at full-time, then you are prohibiting yourself from the optional practical training that most students save for the end of their stay when they are finished. So that's just something to keep in mind. The employment has to have a common nexus with what you're studying. So if you're getting a degree in accounting, it would be reasonable to be an intern at an accounting firm. That would probably qualify. Most schools do want to have some kind of course tied to the practical training. And it's authorized by Lauren or Natalie, the primary designated school officer, or the DSO. They list it on the back of your I-20, so they need to know the employer and the dates that you'll be working there. And that's all you really need. So they may need a letter of offer so that they are aware of the details of the CPT as well. Then on the other hand, we have optional practical training. And this one can also be done during the year, but because it has to be authorized by USCIS, most students keep it for the end of their studies when they graduate. You do get up to a year of OPT. The very last bullet here is for STEM extensions, which are not available for an associate's degree. But if you had a bachelor's degree in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, or math, you could then be eligible for an additional 24 months of OPT, which was really created to help get around the H-1B cap issue, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well. Just like with CPT, OPT has to be something that's related to your major. So again, if you're that accounting major, working at an accounting firm would be great. You wouldn't want, you couldn't go and be a hostess at a restaurant with OPT if your major is in accounting. You do need the recommendation of your school, so you do need to be in touch with Lauren and her office about it, so they can help you with what's needed for the application. And the sweet spot is finding out when to apply. You can apply up to 90 days before your graduation date and or after it, but we've seen many delays recently with the EAD cards, and we'll talk about that a little bit more further on in my talk. But there's really a sweet spot in terms of your graduation date and when you should apply. And if you have an employer already lined up, or if you don't, and if you think you may by the time you graduate. So all that lends itself to a conversation with Lauren or Natalie to help you figure out when exactly to apply. So just to talk a little bit more about the logistics, you'll go in and have a talk with Lauren and her team. And once you know that you want it done, then you have 30 days after the DSO's recommendation to get it into USCIS. So you want to make sure you're doing it timely so that all your steps line up. Even if you don't have an employer when you graduate, you can still apply for OPT. You'll just want to let Lauren and Natalie know once you do get an employer so that they can enter that information in CVIS. It's not that you graduate and leave ECC and you cut ties all of a sudden with the International Education Office. They will be working with you even after you're gone with the CVIS database. So another thing to keep in mind is, let's say you graduate, you get your OPT, but you don't have an employer. You can be unemployed up to 90 days. And that was a new policy that was created after one of the economic downturns we had, the one in 2008. So if you are getting close to that 90 days, you want to keep track of that. You could always go and work or volunteer. Most employers are fine with free help. If you volunteer, then you set the clock off of that unemployment experience. There are some things to keep in mind about maintaining your status when you're in OPT. This can get a little bit dicey because you may be at the end of your F-1 visa stamp. And so if you want to travel, you want to make sure that you're traveling with your EAD card in your hand and that you have a letter of employment from your employer. Because let's say you're entering and your F-1 visa stamp, is expiring within the week, you don't want to have trouble with the CBP officer about letting you back in. Or the same thing if you were to apply for a new F-1 visa stamp. It gets it's not a guarantee depending on where you're from if you would be issued that new visa stamp. And you do have to report any changes relating to your F-1 status to the DSO, because you're still an F-1 student even when you're on OPT. It's not that it's a different status. Another change we had due to 9/11 was that now all foreign nationals have to complete the AR-11 form if they move, and that's found at immigration's website, uscis.gov. So if you graduate from ECC and take a job out in Colorado, you would need to go on to uscis.gov and fill out a change of address form within 10 days of moving. And I see an awful lot. I just had this experience last week. We had an R1 who, as a student, she did not notify her school to update CVIS when she changed employers. But you really need to be doing that after you're off campus and working. If you change employers, Lauren and her team need to know about it. Same thing with any unemployment time. So another topic that I get asked a lot of questions about from students is, okay, I'm graduating, I'm looking for jobs. How do I handle this? Because, you do need that EAD card. If you're graduating, it has to be in your hands, the actual card. It looks a little bit like a license. It's got your photo ID on it. The questions listed here are the ones that the employers are legally allowed to ask you, and they go to fill out the Form I-9, which is used for employment authorization here in the US. And the first one is, are you authorized to work in the US? And if you have your EAD card, what would the answer be? Not a trick question.
Yes.
Yes. So, and then will you need sponsorship? Well, again, that one may be a little bit of a tricky question because you may have sponsorship for the next year, but you would need it in the future. So you would have to say, yes, again, you will need sponsorship. And it's really up to the student to be upfront and transparent about this issue. It's better to know ahead of time if an employer is willing to work with you and your student status versus getting through the process and having them rescind an offer because they don't want to deal with an international. And it really will depend on the kind of employer you have, what kind of reception you get. There are a lot of large employers that are used to working with EAD cards and They really won't blink twice if you say you have an EAD, but a lot of the time you could be going to a small employer and you may be the first person that they've ever worked with who's an international. And so they may need you to help them get educated about what needs to be done. So before we move on to the H-1B, we'll just mention a little bit about the ending of your student status. You have a few options. You have a 60-day grace period after you graduate. And by that time, you should know if you're applying for OPT or if you're leaving the US, you would have those 60 days to close up your things, move your stuff out of your apartment, close your bank accounts. You could travel around the US. You could use that time to be transferring to another school like Luping mentioned. And in that case, you need to talk to Lauren and Natalie so that the transfer application is done to transfer you to a new school. You could be changing educational level. It could just not be a transfer in the same educational level, but you could be going on for a higher level degree. And in general, you want to make sure at all times you're maintaining your status as a student. And I think the one that is really hard sometimes is if you're on OPT and you forget to get that travel endorsement because you're not in campus and getting those reminders anymore. But that's still important if you are going to travel on OPT. So what comes after your F-1 status? There are plenty of F-1 students who want to stay in the US beyond their studies. And if you go on for a bachelor's degree, then you would have the option of applying for an H-1B. The H-1B is defined in the immigration regulations as a position that requires a bachelor's degree, and the individual needs the bachelor's degree or a foreign degree equivalent. So a specialty occupation, by regulation, the regulations actually list out some of those professions, and one of them is an engineer. It could be any kind of engineer, but they are included as a specialty occupation. Doctors, teachers, lawyers, they're all specialty occupations. Some IT fields are as well. So if you're going to be studying something very specific in computer science, that should work. Business, not as likely to be considered a specialty occupation, but definitely accounting would be. And typically an H-1B is granted for an initial 3-year period. It could be less depending on the nature of your employer, and for a total of a maximum of 6 years. And has anybody ever heard of the H-1B cap? Yeah, thanks for raising your hand. I can't see everyone, so, and with them on mute, it's hard to have participation. But the H-1B cap refers to the fact that there is 65,000 new H-1Bs allowed every fiscal year. And the government's fiscal year starts on October 1st. And then we have 20,000 that was a carve-out exception that was created by the second President Bush for US master's or higher degree holders. So 85,000, and there's a definite advantage for someone who has a master's or higher degree over a bachelor's degree. So we're in the H-1B cap season right now with the government's fiscal year starting on October 1st. You can file an H-1B up to 6 months prior, which means April 1st. So anytime between January and April, we consider H-1B season. And it's sort of like being in tax season for an accountant. Last year was the first year that the H-1B cap season went electronic. So the same thing will happen this year. Instead of killing millions of trees and having H-1B petitions that are this thick with the filing, we just now do a placeholder and we do it electronically. The employer submits little information about themselves and the foreign national on the position. And then the lottery is a randomly computer generated lottery then they'll tell us which petitions will be selected, and then usually by June, and then we have a while to submit the H-1B petitions to immigration if you're lucky enough to be selected. So that's what the CAP lottery is, and we're in the CAP season. A CAP gap extension would apply to an F-1 student. Mostly schools, and like you may be entering your program in May or June, you get your EAD card to start, let's say June 1st, and then it's valid for a year, so June 1st the following year, but then you have June 1st, and then if your H-1B petition is selected, you have this gap between October 1st when the H-1B would start and June 1st when the EAD ends. So the CAP gap is immigration considers it properly filed, the H-1B, then you can go to the student office and Lauren and Natalie will review the H-1B documents and write on your I-20 that you have the CAP gap extension in that situation. Do you do any of those?
Typically, we do not because it does require a bachelor's degree or above.
Okay, I just didn't know if there were any at all. So that's a little bit about the H-1B, but we do have some other visa categories that are out there in our toolbox. So that's why I was interested to ask in the beginning who was on the call, what countries you all were from. We do have visas. The first ones listed at the top here are also CAP subject, but I've never seen the caps reached for these visa categories. The E3 for Australians is very much like the H-1B, so is the H-1B one for Chileans and Singaporeans. These were created again by President Bush. So yeah, I've done many of these and never run into a problem with the cap. It's the main H-1B cap that runs into the demand outweighing the supply every year. And then we have some other visa categories. So we have a Canadian student on the call. The TN is available for Canadians and Mexicans. The treaty was renegotiated by President Trump, so it's now called USMCA, but the immigration piece of it, that we still use the TN visa category. And it's not as inclusive as the H-1B visa. There are very specific occupations on the NAFTA appendix. So it is a little bit narrower than an H-1B, but for students who go on for a bachelor's, if you don't get selected, then in the H-1B cap, then you could consider one of the other visa categories listed here if they would apply for you. And there's also the J1, but that would be more for, you can do it as a student or as an intern. There are many different categories for the J: professor, research scholar, au pairs, and not every exchange program covers each category type. Then we have the O1. This is usually for those individuals who are very, considered at the top of their game, either in sports, athletics, the arts, or sciences. So we have in Kane County down the road from us, Fermilab, and there are some physicists at Fermilab that do qualify for the O1 visa because of the nature of their work and how renowned they are internationally. Then we have the L1 intercompany transferee. So this would be, say, for a large multinational company, take Nestle, a Swiss company. Let's say you have worked for Switzerland, Nestle for at least a year, and you want to be transferred to the US, you would qualify under the L1. Then we have the treaty trader, treaty investor visas, and these are based on the Treaty of Commerce that we have with different countries around the world. And this is a good visa because you would just have to have the same nationality as the company, like if it's a Japanese-owned company, but it's not so much dependent on education. So this and what, how, you know, how much you've achieved in your education. So this is a good visa to consider depending on if your country has a treaty of commerce with the US. On the investor side, an E2, that's where the parent company is investing a lot of money in the US operations, or a treaty trader is for a company that primarily has the trade between the US and that treaty country. So for instance, I have a German manufacturer company that is an E1 employer because the most trade that they have throughout the world is between the US and Germany. Whereas I work with more companies that are E2 employers, where it could be a small IT service company that is, you know, started up by, you know, a company abroad, and they open a branch. It can also be used to open a restaurant. There are some Thai restaurants in Chicagoland that have been opened with the treaty investor visa as well. Then we have the religious worker, and this is used for either a minister, or there are some non-minister categories that would work, say like for music directors and other options in an organized religion. Next, we'll just talk briefly about the main steps of the, I'm sorry, my slides are different than what I thought I was talking about next. So the permanent visa, IV is the immigrant visa, which is synonymous with legal permanent resident, LPR, green card holder, immigrant. These all mean the same things. And there are these ways listed here are the main ways to become a permanent resident in the US. You may have the proper family relationship to have a family member apply for you. We talked a little bit about employment and the different visa options. If you do work and continue to study and then end up working in the US, you may be eligible for a green card through employment. And then we have the lottery. How many of you have heard of the lottery before? Any?
Yes.
Okay, and so the lottery is a good avenue to do if you're from a country that's eligible. So countries where the US has a lot of immigration, we do not allow lottery applicants from those countries, such as Canadians. Unfortunately, you're not permitted to be in a lottery. The countries that benefited the most last year from the lottery were Egypt, Russia, Algeria, Ukraine, Congo, Morocco. So the world is basically divided into different regions, and if you fall into one of those regions, then you can apply. And all you need is a high school degree, and you can be inside or outside the US. So if it's your intent to stay here permanently, it's a good idea. You don't have anything to lose by doing it. There are a lot of scams out there, so you want to make sure you go to the website listed here. This is the Department of State's website, and at travel.state.gov. Typically, starting in the summer, they'll announce when we'll have the new lottery, and it's normally listed in September because, again, we have the government's fiscal year starting October 1st, and that's when you would want to be paying attention for the deadlines. And it is something that you have to pay attention to, because if you get selected, you have to submit all your documents as soon as possible, because if you don't, there's someone else waiting to jump on and take that spot. They issue more than they can have, and so it's really a first come, first serve situation. Then we have the investment visa, or it's sometimes, referred to as the EB-5, employment-based fifth preference category. Most people think of it as like the rich person's visa with an investment of at least $500,000. It's probably more like $1 million, and there are a lot of hoops to go through for this. So normally I'm able to talk clients out of that and getting them in a different visa category. And then the last way is to enter the US as a refugee or as an asylee, and that's also a path towards a green card. Next, we'll talk a little bit about travel or lack thereof during the pandemic. We have proclamations, presidential proclamations that were implemented during President Trump. And so far, the COVID-related ones have stayed and are still enforceable under President Biden. They're expected to expire at the end of next month, but we'll see, depending on how the world goes, they may be extended. I was just reading today that the South African variant of the virus is now in New York. So it is a very bad time to be traveling. We have arrival restrictions from many countries in the world. Early on, it was China, Brazil, Iran, and then Schengen refers to the European countries. They're in the Schengen region, and that comprises about 23 countries. So we have a ban on individuals coming into the US from those countries, unless you apply for a national interest exception or you quarantine in a third country prior to entering the US for a period of 14 days. Early in the pandemic, we had lots of Europeans going to the Bahamas and other Caribbean countries to do their 14-day quarantine and a Caribbean vacation. But the Bahamas has now made it so that you have to show a negative COVID test to enter there as well first. Turkey and Dubai are other ones I've seen foreign nationals successfully go to for quarantine. Mexico is a common one just because it's our southern border and it's easy to enter the US from there. But again, if you're going to look at a quarantine situation, it's a fluid area and it's constantly changing. So you really need to stay on top of the news in terms of going any place to do the quarantine. And then we have the embassies and consulates abroad. They were basically told back in March to send everybody home to the US. So these posts are working with a skeletal staff, and while staff have returned to their posts from the US, they're still not up to speed. They're still only doing emergency appointments, and they don't have the full-fledged processing that they do when things are during normal times, regular times. So a lot of times you would only be getting an appointment now if you qualify for an emergency appointment, and then you would have to qualify for a national interest exception. So it's still somewhat of a situation where, you know, it's probably best to not travel if you don't have to. Although I think I just read that students will not have to be a part of the NIEs. So that's good. And we will have, you know, more changes coming up with Biden. He has said he's going to be aggressive about making changes in immigration, but we do have, you know, the administration he's taking over from President Trump was very anti-immigrant. So I did a calculation. It was basically every 3.5 days over the last 4 years with President Trump that we had some new immigration change. So it left us all like with our heads spinning and in a very reactive mode. There was this memo that Trump had notified the US that we were working under a Buy American, Hire American status, and Biden has rescinded that memo. So that was causing delays and kickbacks, and many of the employment-based petitions we were submitting. There was greater scrutiny on all kinds of petitions, not just employment-based, but, you know, OPT applications and family-based applications. Requests for evidence went up across the board, all kinds of applications. There were more worksite visits and employer audits. And we have this fraud agency that's part of immigration now since 2008 to deal with perceived fraud in the H-1B, L-1, and R-1 visa categories. So immigration, I think it was back in 2010, put the public on notice that it is looking at social media. So if you submit something to immigration, make sure that your media outlets are clean. If you are submitting an employment-based, application, let's say you're doing something with your OPT, make sure your LinkedIn is only listing what you would want immigration to know about, because they do check those sites. And then we're going round and round with this public charge question. There's been a new form called the I-944 for adjustment of status applications. That's really been pretty intrusive in terms of asking for credit reports and very detailed credit information about foreign nationals, and it's entered into litigation. So we'll see where that ends up. Hopefully we will be able to get rid of that form with the new administration. So with Biden, his new bill that he introduced for immigration was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. It was just introduced in the House earlier this month on the 18th, and then it should be going to the Senate early this week. So keep your eyes and ears out for more news about what will happen with that. The travel ban for Muslim countries that was imposed by President Trump has been lifted. So that's a promising change. A lot of the midnight or very last minute regulations and orders that President Trump had signed have all been frozen until President Biden has a chance to go through each of them and decide what to do about them. We have President Biden wanting to take a very different tack than President Trump on DACA or the Dreamers. So hopefully we'll have good news about that coming up. And in the first 100 days of office, Biden has made a promise to make major transformations with our immigration system. So more news to come, stay tuned, and hopefully there'll be good things ahead. Just today, I don't know if this would apply to anyone here, but just today they announced that immigration was going back to an old version, the 2008 version of the naturalization test. It was just changed recently under President Trump, and it was supposed to be a lot harder with harder questions, new questions, changed questions. So that's also good. It's going back in time to the older test. And just to end here, we have an overview slide, just simple reminders, things you can do right now. You want to maintain your current legal status, stay enrolled full-time in your program. If you have to go below that, you need to talk to Lauren and Natalie. At a very minimum, for anyone in the US, you got to make sure your passport is valid. That's your responsibility. You want to have a valid I-20. If you change majors, let Lauren and her team know. And when you enter the US, that CBP officer, make sure that they're entering your status correctly as the DS, D/S. You don't want to work without authorization in the US, and especially, don't want to have anything on your social media that would say anything to the contrary. And if you are at ECC, think about going on, and going to a higher level of study so that you could go after that H-1B eventually. Again, it is a very worrisome time for international travel. I have clients who are stuck outside the US who can't get in. I have clients in the US that are desperately trying to, waiting to when they can leave. But if you can hold on a little longer, that would be my recommendation. Hopefully we'll see the vaccination rate and herd immunity take care of this pretty soon. And when you have questions, please feel free to reach out to Lauren and Natalie, and you can also reach out to me. I'm listing my paralegal here under my name on this last slide because she was also an F&J counselor for probably close to 25 years at some big land grant institutions, and we're happy to help. So now I'm just, I'm ready to open it up to some questions. I like it to be a little bit more participatory than we've been able to be. So if there are any questions,
I have one.
okay.
I live with my brother. If he applies under like the family status, does that affect my N1? Or how does it affect my N1 or my F1?
You have an F1 or an M1?
F1.
Okay. So is your brother a US citizen?
Yes, he is.
Okay. Well, the visa, the immigrant visas take so long, it probably won't affect your student status very much.
Okay. So it's not a fast process to apply under the family plan.
No, if you want to hold on a second, I can grab the chart that I have for that. The Department of State keeps running tabs on the green cards that are available, and they update it at their website every month at the Department of State's website that I had listed earlier, travel.state.gov. So if you're applying through, it would be, if you want to go to travel.state.gov, you're looking for the visa bulletin, and it's printed on a monthly basis. So right now I have in my hand the one for this month, but next month should be coming out soon. But you would be in the 4th preference category, F4, as the sibling of a US citizen. And they're working on applications filed back in October of 2006.
Okay.
So you have a long wait. Not to say it's not worth it, but it's not going to help you in the short term.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
So for the OPT, if I graduate from ECC, can I do the OPT, and after I transfer another university, I can do again?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I forgot to mention that. So are you going to another university to obtain a higher degree?
Yes.
Then yes, you would be entitled to a year of OPT after each degree that you finish. So associate's degree 1 year OPT, bachelor's another year OPT, master's another year. So that's how it works.
Okay, so if I graduate from ECC and then I find a job for the OPT, can I just hold all my credit? Because if I want to transfer to another university, I need to use the ECC credits.
You're asking me not about OPT, but about credits transferring?
Yes, I'm not sure I can hold them,
Yeah,
hold all credits.
so Ashley, that's a good question. So when you, at each educational level, like Jackie said, you qualify for OPT, your credits at ECC are not going to quote unquote expire, right? So if you were to delay transferring to a 4-year university by a year to do post-completion OPT, your credits would still transfer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Jackie, is it okay if I just make one comment?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so we have a lot of students that that are interested in OPT. One of the things that I do want to mention is that if you are graduating in May, or you're graduating, let's say in the summer in August or whatnot, the delays with OPT right now are pretty extreme. So you can file for OPT 90 days before your program end date on your I-20. And we strongly encourage you to do so at that 90-day mark, to have everything in order, to have your I-20 processed, recommending OPT, and to have your I-765, all your paperwork in order, so that when that 90-day comes, you can go ahead and apply. Because what's happening is USCIS is so inundated with OPT applications and other applications as well, that students are not seeing even receipt notices within that 90-day period. And so what's happening is some students are not getting their OPT approval or adjudication before their 60-day grace period expires. So the sooner you apply, the more likely that you'll have time and you won't have to hopefully not worry about those delays. So if you are interested in applying for OPT, post-completion OPT, and you're going to be graduating this semester or in the near future, please schedule an appointment with me and we'll walk you through the process.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't point that out, but I would also mention that there is litigation over the EAD delays. So it may not be in time for the May graduates, but we'll hopefully see this process get faster in the near future. So USCIS used to have a regulation that demanded that they issue the EADs within 90 days. Then the agency got rid of its own regulation. So now they're not beholden to that 90-day time frame anymore, which means that the processing times have jumped up. And we had that a little bit because of the prior administration just delaying everything, making everything slow, just to create hassles for all our immigrants and just, you know, anxiety. So hopefully that will be got in check. Also with, you know, hopefully COVID delays will be behind us soon. Weather delays will be behind us soon. And we'll see an uptick in these applications processed.
Are there any? Oh, go ahead, Tim.
Yes, I'm having a question. I see you mentioned that you have the EB-5 visas. So I don't know how that works. And you said that you have clients for that.
Well, the EB-5 is a very complicated visa area. So basically, there are two ways to do it. You can have your own business and create a business that way, or you can invest in a regional center for EB-5s. It's very risky, in my opinion, to do the regional centers. But if you were to say invest in a hotel in Chicago, your investment would not be $500,000. It'd probably be more like $1 to $2 million that you would have to invest. And then you're given a 2-year period in which you're given a conditional green card. You're given a 2-year period in which to create a certain number of jobs for US workers or green card holders, and they can be direct or indirect jobs. And if you don't create those jobs within those 2 years, then your conditional status is revoked and you're put in deportation proceedings. So the whole investor visa is a very risky one. And normally if someone is interested in that category, I can find a safer option in an E or L for them, and then permanent residency based on the underlying status that way. Where are you from, Tim?
Vietnam. So I used to read about the EB-5, and the thing is, I'm not sure if we can choose the type of company that we want to investment in, or do I need to rely on you know, the option that I already have?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Like do I have the right to choose what kind of company that I want to invest in? Or
Yeah, you could look at many of the regional centers out there that are looking for investors. Like there's former military bases that they're using to develop for, you know, commercial or residential real estate. Like I mentioned, you know, there was one in Chicago recently that was a hotel. There's ski resorts on the East Coast. But the problem is, if you go the route of a regional center, then you have to show that you know, you're buying a place in line. So the EB-5 has limits on the number of green cards it can issue per fiscal year. And it can get very complicated. You could get, you may not be eligible to apply because there are no more spots for you. I think this may be getting a little bit out of the scope of the F and OPT. So if you have more questions about that, I think we should maybe do those offline.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, are there any more questions for Jackie? Okay, if you do have individual questions or you want to follow up with her, like I said at the beginning, this presentation will be available as a recording, and we'll send out an email when that is available. So we do encourage you to contact her if you do have any immigration questions. She is local. She's right down the street, about a 15-20 minute drive from the college, so super close. And if you have any other questions about anything that was talked about today, feel free to reach out to me or Natalie. And we wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you so much, Jackie, for joining us today.
You're
and
welcome.
we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Likewise, hopefully in person next time.
Hopefully in person next time. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.